Hello, friends. As we are winding our way closer and closer to the end of the semester, we are now in chapter 13 on visual persuasion. I think this chapter is kind of fun in that it makes us take a look at something that we are looking at all the time, but not necessarily critiquing, evaluating, or analyzing. We just kind of take it for what it is, the pictures and images that appear before us. So today we're going to take a kind of a more objective, critiquey kind of look at the images that come before us and how, when, where, and why do they seek to persuade us with those images. So the first point is talking about the place of images. Images, everything. And they're trying to make the point here that it hasn't always been this way, and it is a changing scenario. It's an increasingly visual society, and some of us would think it's already there. We've already arrived at a visual society, but at least from a academic perspective on the issue, we're not there completely yet. But we do have corporate logos and insignias that we see all the time, social media images, emojis that we're all familiar with. I tend to use the same one or two emojis all the time. I don't venture into the variety that is out there. So there are certainly lots of images before us. And as I said a moment ago, persuasion's traditional focus has been on the oral and or textual messages. That's where the history has brought us. And I like the phrase the textbook uses with the world of words. We live in a world of words, but they're saying, but we're becoming more and more a world of images, and not just pictures, but video and, like they mentioned, emojis, all sorts of different visual images that are now before us. And they say it's been understudied and neglected, that we haven't looked at it as closely as we ought. I think that seems right. We use them all the time, but we don't necessarily critique, evaluate them as much as we ought. So the first slide is basically saying we have a ways to go. We're still kind of, hooked on words, which I don't think we will ever get away from. And yet, we some things we do already know about pictures and images. We assume the perceived realness of images. In other words, we kind of assume that if we see a picture of something, that is an accurate picture of reality. In fact, probably more so than words, because words can be changed, manipulated, abused, misused, etc. But when you have a picture of something, you've got the real deal, and they're going to try to impress with us. That is not at all true. It is an assumption on our part. They call it the picture superiority effect, that images are more easily recognized and recalled, which is true. In other words, if you tell me what somebody said, I may have a hard time recalling it. But if you say, what picture did they put up there, I have a more likely chance of giving you the picture accurately than necessarily the words. And then images cross languages and cultures more easily. That words are more subject to cultural boundaries or idiosyncrasies, where images can cross over more easily and are more universal. So how images persuade? They have three components or elements that we should know about how images do their work. The first one is iconicity, that images stand for and resemble the things they represent. So we have the picture of Statue of Liberty, and how many words come to mind of what that statue represents? Yeah, it represents a statue, a woman holding a torch and a book or whatever. To be honest, I'm not sure what she's holding. Is she holding the Constitution? But anyway, whatever she's holding. So it's literally that, but it represents what? Freedom, the light being shown in the darkness, that there is a greater focus that we kind of can all focus on with this country. You might think of other things, but in that one image are these multiple concepts and ideas. And they point out a trash can on a computer says you don't need these things. But I guess to me, if I'm thinking about it, it also represents that that trash can, I can throw it in there, but I know it's still there just in case until I actually go and empty the trash can or empty the trash. So there, to me, it's those two things. I don't need it, at least for now, but at least I know where it is. And I'm not one to overkeep items. I try to avoid keeping every single email or every single text I get, but I also at the same time don't try not to be too hasty in my discarding. And then a silhouette of a disabled person on a restroom. We kind of all know what that means. Somewhere in the textbook, it was talking about it doesn't necessarily have to be a 100% match of the picture, and that the icons on the restrooms, for the men's restroom and the women's, they don't have faces, they don't have hands, they don't have feet. They're simply general outlines, but we know exactly what they stand for, and that's where it says that their icons don't need to be accurate. They can violate reality, and we're not offended by that or surprised or confused when it violates reality. Yeah, people have feet and hands, and so just because those doesn't mean we say they're incorrect or have a problem understanding the message they are sending. Second is indexicality. That images, especially photographs, have documentary quality. That we can look at a picture and we say that something took place here, an event happened. And they show the Bigfoot. I love the new Bigfoot commercials where Bigfoot is tired of being hidden away and he wants to have a little more popularity. But anyway, I don't know if you have seen that. Some of these things are kind of dated for you folks. The Abu Ghraib photos of the prison. That was actually in the Iraqi war, if I'm correct. JFK assassination, boy, that was back in '63. You were not even close to being born yet. And the Holocaust images back, obviously, in the 30s and 40s. But these images, I can still think of. I was trying to get a picture of it for you, but I remember it was back in the 1963, I believe, that Life magazine ran an issue. Is Life magazine still around? I don't think it is. But Life magazine was there was Look and Life magazines. They were big in the 60s and 70s, but I don't think they even exist. But anyway, this one gentleman ran some pictures, some photos, did a photo article on pictures of unborn children. And I always thought they were pictures somehow in the womb, but apparently I was reading a little bit on it, and they were taken outside the womb I was reading more about it. Infants that were aborted for some reason, and they would lay out the babies, and this gentleman took photos of them, but it was always kind of assumed that those photos impacted the role of abortion in that people could actually see what was going on with these unborn children. It's always kind of been a mystery, but these kind of brought that out into the light and affected the pro-life movement, which I am very much a part of. And I was reading also that pro-lifers have used these photos over the years without copyright permission. And it said that the photographer never tried to make a big deal out of these things and tried to lay low. And so a very interesting aspect of the power of those photos. But that would be kind of my example of a photo. I remember I was only about, 5 or 6 at the time, but I still remember seeing those photos from that magazine. And you might think of some significant photos you have seen that encapsulated not just the item being pictured, but a movement or a perspective or a state of mind or a concept or a principle, that the photo actually became bigger than itself. And there is a truth claim. We mentioned this earlier a few moments ago. The truth claim of photography is the assumption that the camera never lies. Whatever the camera captures is accurate and true, and we just know that's not true. And however, there on the right side, we have a preference for unretouched photos, that once we find out a picture has been retouched, it kind of loses value and kind of drops of its impact. We can say, well, they just retouched it. And that's a whole thing with fashion models or models for other things, that when they've, especially maybe it's weight loss products or something like that, that if the photos have been retouched, then they don't carry that as much value. They also talked about staged events, that certain events that politicians will appear at or other prominent social individuals, the pictures are taken and they want to appear that these things just kind of happened. But in the reality is it was staged, it was choreographed, it was appointments were made, show up at this time, will be done by this time, but we'll all make it look spontaneous. And the reality is it is not taking place. And the fact is, some of these events we wouldn't have known they were happened unless we would not have known they happened unless they had been set up and the photos or film or the digital what am I saying here? When a video camera feed has been intentionally sent to the news to say, hey, this event happened and it's important because we think it's important, and so you should put it on the news at 5 o'clock or 6 o'clock or 11 o'clock tonight. And the other thing is the presence or absence of the camera influence. That the news broadcast, I thought this is very interesting. I read this in a textbook a few years ago about, they just basically dissected the evening news, and we think the newscast is simply, they're telling us what happened, exactly what happened, giving us details with no bias, no opinion, just the facts. But then in this chapter in this textbook, they went through and identified the variety of things that happen that actually influence the news. And I don't know how many I can remember here, but for example, which of the two newscasters that are on the evening news, which one gets the story? That there's power in having the story, that probably the lead gets the big stories, and their co-anchor, who may be less than, gets the other stories that aren't as big or as hot. And so that's one. Do they put it on the 5 o'clock news, the 6 o'clock news, the 11 o'clock news? Do they lead with that story, or do they bury it somewhere in the background after, weather and sports, where people have kind of watched that and then have gone maybe to bed already? And what is the story that precedes it? What is the story that follows it? But all these different ways that we don't even begin to think of how a news story is presented. And we try to say it's objective and factual, but that sometimes is the furthest thing from the truth. And then also digitally altered images. This is like, the retouched or unretouched pictures that when we know they have been altered, they lose value to the audience. We're getting a lot of emails here. Okay, the third item is syntactic indeterminacy. And this is where images convey, language is, even though it can be altered, the reality is language has a closer relationship between, two items, where photos, that relationship is not as clear, not as articulate, and there is a lot of presumption going on of what's happening in the relationship between things in a photo. They say, the textbook says, they lack logical operators, that there is the issue of deduction, cause and effect reasoning are not necessarily accurate, and they are unknown. They say that only time and space, that you can see in time and space accurately with photos, but that's about it. Associations can equate one thing with another, and that is left up to the observer to make those assumptions, because it doesn't tell us anywhere what the connection is, and the observer can get it wrong. Or maybe that's the whole idea, that it's left up to the observer to make their own conclusions based on the photo. But sometimes, I don't care how subjective we want, how much subjectivity we want to encourage, sometimes people are just wrong on conclusions they draw from a photo. And then just a couple of comments about advertisers. They're not lost with just using photos, in that they have had a lot of practice of knowing what photos to use, what kind of lighting to use, what kind of angles to use, what kind of cropping to use. They know how to set up a photo to make a message. And then also, the nice thing is they can combine both words and images. They are not just stuck to images. They can add words to it. And the textbook pointed out that if you don't get one, maybe you don't quite get what the image is telling you, you have the words there to lead you, and vice versa. If the words aren't clear, then there's the picture to make the statement as well. So images in themselves do persuade. Now, they had an interesting portion on art and the power of art to persuade. We want to think that art is just more for the aesthetic pleasure of enjoying it, seeing it, but it's more than that. It's not just decorative, and just as rhetoric in the world of words, just as rhetoric is more than mere eloquence. We talk about choosing beautiful words, nice sounding words, parallelism, and rhyme, and all these things, that iambic pentameter, and all these use of words. But they're saying that rhetoric isn't just the words. There is power in the persuasion of words. So also, art is not just beautiful images, but there's also a persuasive power in the art itself. And artists express their opinions in and through their work. Now, there's a little photo there of the bowl in, it is in New York, right? And then the Fearless Girl photo image that was added to it. And I'm going to have you do an exercise. I've been thinking about this. I'm going to have you do a forum discussion on those images, because one of the situations was they were thinking about allowing the girl, the Fearless Girl statue, to remain there, where the bull was, well, for lack of a better term, there first. And then, so you take this Fearless Girl and put it in front of the bull. How does that change the image and the message of the bull with the Fearless Girl standing there? And does the artist have the right to impose that on the other statue when the other one was there and established? So how does it come in? So anyway, I'm going to have you discuss that in a forum post for that. So, okay, so back to art and persuasion, and how some different ways that art can persuade. It increases awareness of an issue. And I can't remember if it was in this class or another class, but Picasso, after the bombing during World War II, bombing of a village in Spain by the Nazi Germany, and he drew a piece of artwork that he wanted to make big and bold, to make a statement, so to bring up this issue of the bombing. So he did that. It also requires interpretation. That's one way that we become aware of an issue, that we are called to interpret the pictures. And when a picture is given like this, or a statue, or something else, it makes us think. And if we remember our elaboration likelihood model, thinking is promoting central processing, or what they also call active thinking, in interpreting the meaning of a work. So to interpret a piece of artwork means we have to work hard mentally. We can't just passively say, oh, I like the color or this or that. We have to think through, what is the significance, what is the meaning of this piece of art. And they said that the more we think about something like that, then the more likely it is to trigger lasting change. So if it influences us and we had to evaluate, critique, decide, interpret, then it's more likely going to be a more lasting change than just something we think for a moment and then it's gone by tomorrow. They also talked about through participation, that not only to think about it mentally and maybe come to some kind of passive agreement, but here we are called to participate with the artwork. They're what they have called interactive art. Now, I don't know if you even have ever heard of this, but there was the AIDS quilt back in the 90s. Back in the 90s, they talk about it in the textbook, where as more and more people were dying from AIDS, that started in the early 80s. In fact, my brother died of AIDS. So I remember this well on that whole issue. And while there was certainly a moral aspect of, the role of homosexuality or promiscuity, of is there any such thing as safe sex, and so certainly promoting monogamy and in marriage and celibacy and singleness, which has been the Christian perspective. But one thing that the AIDS quilt did, and I remember experiencing this and thinking about it and feeling this, is that it brought out the human side, that even if we're all broken, we're all separated from God, only through Christ are we reconciled to him. But we're all still people, and we all have our issues and struggles and shortcomings. But the AIDS quilt just reminded you of the person, of the personage of the person who passed away, and their loved ones, and they were loved by people. And this quilt was kind of interesting in that sense. I never saw any of it, but it certainly made a large impact on a lot of people. So anyway, so that's certainly participatory art that makes us think. And certainly, as we know, art can be controversial. And again, make us think. There was another statue. There was a whole thing. I'm sure it's still around. But the National Endowment of the Arts was paying for people to do art that many people found offensive. And there was one statue that was done with a, was it called the cross immersed in urine? That was the idea of the artwork. And, Christians would find that offensive, and yet our government is paying to have this kind of artwork done and preserved. And so that certainly is a controversy. Should the government be paying for artwork? And so on the one hand, I like art. I like that people can find to make a living doing art, and art can be perpetuated. But then at the same time, what about if I don't agree with the art? Then can I just turn around and say, well, they can pay for this, that, and the other, but they can't pay for this other type of art because I disagree with it. So there's a controversy there of what should the government pay for. Okay, so anyway, cinematic persuasion, another type of artwork. And certainly we would probably all agree that movies are influential. And a few things, movies reach a large number of people, large numbers of people. And that's one of the issues. It can have a broad impact, that a movie comes out and lots of people see it. And whatever message that movie might be sending is going to certainly get a large viewing, a large audience. So that's a thing in itself. So potential for mass influence. Maybe nobody will be influenced. A lot of people saw it, didn't agree with it, didn't bother with it, but it also has the potential that a lot of people can be influenced by a movie. And they talk about the power of the movie is in its narrative form, that it's not often a documentary, it's not a fact-finding presentation, it is simply telling a story. And when you tell a story, people's defenses go down, they're not as ready for a fight, they're more relaxed, they're more at ease, and aren't expecting persuasion. So persuasion, we might say, is coming through the back door. That we have a willing suspension of disbelief. That we're saying, well, for the next hour and a half or 2 hours or however long movies are, we're not going to, mentally we're saying this, we're not subconsciously, I'm not going to worry about critiquing. I don't know if I ever put down my guard, even when I go to a movie, because I'm always trying to look for something to steal in terms of sermon illustrations. So I'm always critiquing. But I think there are times where you just let down your guard and you just want to enjoy the next hour and a half. You don't want to think so hard or go through a mental effort just to watch a movie, that we want to be entertained. So, so if persuasion is coming, it has an easier target and a more open door to get in and make an impact. Okay, how movies persuade? Well, they had this list of items. Viewer identification, that we see a character in a movie and we want to be like them. We want to be Sylvester Stallone. We want to be Indiana Jones. We want to be this person or that person. And so we kind of like what we see, and we, see the characteristics there. A product placement. Have you noticed in movies that quite often there will be a Coca-Cola product or a MacBook? I noticed in the Hallmark movies that when a phone rings, it is always the iPhone ring to it and all that. But then again, they also have, products that look like the Coca-Cola can or the Pepsi can, or one of the shows that my kids used to watch on Nickelodeon or the Disney Channel years ago. They had instead of the apple, they had, what was it, the pear? That was the computer that they used. I think it was the pear. So they didn't have an apple. Stereotyping and limited roles. That the textbook explained over and over how for minorities that their roles are limited. They're always kind of seen in a certain way. And so the stereotyping we make then leads to limited roles for the actors to be able to fill those roles, because if it is this type of person in the movie, it's always they act this way, that way, or the other way, and very specific and limited. Social proof and modeling of behavior, that if we see if people are doing something, it must be okay, and we're going to possibly do that same item as well. Movies are one of the ways that values can be exported to other cultures for the good or for the bad. A lot of, again, this is dating myself back to the 80s and 90s. The Middle East had a big problem with Madonna and the things that she expressed, or promiscuity and sexual freedom and not enough clothes covered up, I guess. I don't know. But they were saying that's what they took Madonna and said that's what American culture is like, and we don't want to be that. And so she was kind of the poster child, among others, I'm sure, of what American culture is. She was that's what had been exported into other cultures. Promoting popular culture. There are certain fads that are done in movies, and they become very popular because the movie people are doing those things. What they wear, their hairstyle. There's a great statement in the movie The Devil Wears Prada about the role of popular people, and runway items become popular, and they kind of eventually work their way down from $1,000 sweater at, I don't know, whatever store sells $1,000 sweaters, to the $20 sweater you wear at Walmart, but you buy at Walmart, but it all kind of has its starts somewhere else and then influences eventually what people, everyday people like me, what we end up buying and wearing. And then there also is this cultivation theory that when we watch violence on television, uh, we kind of draw the conclusion that we live in a very scary, very dangerous society because we see it on in the movies, and then we assume that that's reflecting reality, and we need to be more careful and stay home more and lock the doors because of what we saw in a movie. Okay, advertising images. We are exposed to, they say hundreds, but it probably is thousands of images, advertising images every day. And the more media we watch, the more screen time we have, the more we are influenced, impacted by it. So advertising is pervasive, meaning it is everywhere. Billboards, we see it while we're driving, TV commercials, print ads, pop-ups, banner ads. And I added the gas stations here. I'm not seeing it as much anymore. I don't know if it's come and gone, but certain gas stations you would go to get gas and there would be a little screen there that would show you a Shell oil or Chevron commercial for their gasoline, but then it would also show you a clip of uh, sitcom, Seinfeld, or something else, would just play for 30 seconds, so you're being entertained while you are buying gas. And then you get the gas brief commercial, then back to entertainment. But the commercial is sandwiched in between clips of funny shows. So ads have to stand out from the background of media clutter. Media clutter is the fact that everybody is advertising, and we're seeing advertising all the time in all these different ways. Even on the online calculator I like always has advertising on it. So even there you can't get away from it. And they need to keep raising the stakes to keep your attention. You've got to do more, be louder, be bolder, be something different in order to keep my attention. And as then the new becomes commonplace, so there needs to be a new to hold and grab our attention. They talk about visual extravaganzas. What kind of images do they need to do now to top all the others? They talk about anti-ads, where they are taking traditional advertising and ridiculing it. And so it's an anti-ad. And it's kind of an interesting approach to this with the anti-ad, that they're kind of saying, oh, you're too smart for us to fool. You know that you figured it all out. And so we're not going to try to fool you. In fact, we're going to take it to the extreme and ridicule our own types of commercials because you already are on the inside joke. But the reality is they are still trying to manipulate and persuade you by making you think that they think that you know what's going on. So they're kind of took it to the next step of that logical process. Shock ads, or shockvertising, what they call it. That is edgy and controversial, and people aren't sure what to do with it, but the conclusion is that it works. And Carl's Jr. used to have ads like this where I think I mentioned this in the last lecture. Paris Hilton did commercials, and so everybody's trying to top somebody else in terms of going out there. But you always have to find this balance between being edgy, that you've got to be edgy enough to be different and to stand out, but you can't be too edgy in that it is too offensive, too exploitive, too gross, too weird that people just don't get it. So you've got to find that sweet spot right in the middle between not far enough and not too far. Okay, image-oriented advertising continued. Common themes this positive associations with products that you want to, in your mind, make the connection, or in the consumer's mind, that when they buy and use your product, they are participating in some principle of it. Not just using a certain razor blade or shaving cream or cologne or perfume, but there's something more that gets. You buy something else for your money. So, for example, certain products are more social status and elitism. That if you buy a Mercedes or a BMW or a Jaguar, uh, you're part of a special club because not everybody can afford that. Cause related, certain products that you buy. They used to have. Do they even make Tom's shoes anymore? Where the idea was, if you bought one pair, then Tom's shoes would donate a pair to a community, a culture where there is a need for shoes, and so you could be part of that. Power, speed, and strength. So gym commercials would certainly be an example of power, speed, and strength. Certain cars that you buy that are fast cars, 0 to 60. Uh, Youth culture, they're used to buy certain products that old people would never buy. And if they did, it would look ridiculous. So they didn't worry about trying to sell to people over 25 years old. They just didn't worry about that market. They just sold to the younger kids, as I call them. Safety and security. Certainly, there are a lot of home security systems now, the Ring doorbell, but all these products are saying when you buy the doorbell, you're buying security, that you're going to be safer at home. You're not really buying a doorbell, you're buying security. This kind of reminds me of an old principle in advertising, that they used to say it this way: when you buy a drill, what are you really buying? A speed drill. Well, you're not buying a drill, you're buying, what you're buying? A hole. You're buying the ability to make a hole. So you're buying a hole. And we need to think in those terms. And that's what this is. When you're buying these products, you're not buying just a cologne. You're buying sporty, you're buying sophisticated, you're buying rich, you're buying something else. And then, and last week when I mentioned some of my favorite products, another one that I didn't mention was Ralph Polo cologne. I've been wearing Ralph Polo cologne for since probably about 81 or 82 in college. One of my professors wore it. I liked it. I bought it. So what was I buying? Maybe nostalgia, that I still wear it after uh, 90, 2000, 2010. Over 40 years I've been wearing that same cologne. So maybe that's that last one, sense of place or belonging or nostalgia. That I wear it because I like the smell of it, but also it does bring back a sense of, Westmont College in the early 80s. It brings all that back. Okay, photojournalism and persuasion. Photographs tell visual stories. We kind of touched on this in other ways, but photographic evidence is powerful and convincing. I'm just reading through these. Photos are more universally understood. We talked about different cultures and languages, that photos go beyond that. Photos sum up social controversies, that we see a picture, and sometimes we need a label, that the newscasters will give us a label, or in a newspaper, but they give us a label, and sometimes we can see the whole thing just in one photo. Something they gave a few examples in the textbook, but again, mostly before your time. And photos can evoke emotion, anger, compassion, fear, or pity. And can you think of a picture that for you that sums up those kinds of items? Okay, and then finally, this last slide, continuing on photojournalism. Photographs are not objective representations of reality. They could be, I guess. Photo can be taken of a flower or your house, and but so many items, so many list of items that can be done that can alter or manipulate the photo, and the photographer can decide so much of what a photo is going to present by what to shoot, the angle, the lighting, when to shoot during the day, how much zoom, how much focal point, which pictures to develop out of the multitude that they take, how they're going to edit it. So before we even see the picture, there have been, 25 questions and decisions that have been made about how that photo is going to come out. And they make a point: seeing is not believing. That a picture, don't assume that a picture is what we think it is. It could be a variety of other issues. And I asked the question, which photo to the right over there is more real? So we want to think, well, the one where the woman is more bland and washed out and all that, and the other one's more real. But then I was wondering, could it be also that the one to the right is more real, and they wanted to downplay uh, this young lady and make her look less than, right? So they use less makeup, or the lighting in the photos not as much, and all these elements are done intentionally to downplay rather than to upgrade. So sometimes it can go either way. I don't know if it is here or not. I have no idea. But anyway, the final word on that is to improve your critical viewing. Don't take a picture just for what it is. Even when you go to the movies, I would say don't take off your critiquing hat. Always be a critiquer and evaluator, and you can be boring, and nobody will want to be with you because you're always the fuddy-duddy. But that's the way it goes. So anyway, so just a variety of thoughts there on uh, visual persuasion. All right, thank you, and until next time.